Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, we've been extremely vocal that this Oregon Ducks program heading into 2024, it is a national championship caliber team. And a lot of our discussions around this Oregon team have really been how do they break through and win a national championship in the 2024 year? And the one conversation that we really, have banging the table for is a little bit more juice in the pass rush going into 2024. You look at the recipes for national championship level defenses, the Georgia Bulldogs the last couple of years, Michigan in 2023, it starts up front with a ferocious pass rush. Dan Lanning knows that more than anybody. And you take a look back at Oregon in 2023, there were a lot of aspects of this program that were national championship level. One of the aspects that probably wasn't was what Oregon did in the pass rush. And I think that's reflected not only in terms of the film, but you look at the numbers and say, all right, Brandon Dorlus led this program with 5 sacks last year. Your number 2 sack leader was Evan Williams. And I think that just kind of shows that Oregon was awfully reliant on sending linebackers and safeties to manufacture pressure on the quarterback. But what excites the boys the most going into 2024, Oregon's got a trio of edge rushers going into their second year of college football that showed some really good stuff on the film their true freshman year that really could break out in the 2024 season. And if you start talking about some of the most important breakout candidates for this Oregon program, Matayo Uiagalelei, Teitum Tuioti, and Blake Purchase. Going to dive into a little bit of the film from what we saw from these 3 young cats during their true freshman year, talk about what it might look like in 2024. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just a massive shout out to the Oregon Duck fans. It has been a blast talking this program, specifically on the recruiting trail. Now, we still got a really good football team heading into 2024 that we have to talk about as well. Can't thank the Oregon fans enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dylan, next week on the docket, film deep dive into the wide receiver room, which we think is probably a top 3 unit in the country heading into 2024. But without further ado, let's get into these young edge rushers for Oregon. And Dill, I'll give you the floor before we get into the film, kind of some overarching takes on these cats heading into 2024.
So, yeah, I think the 3 you talked about, obviously, those are the guys who I think showed the most flashes. I do imagine we're going to get a lot of comments about Amarion Winston and leaving him out. I don't know that you got to see him on the field as much and quite craft what you kind of think about him completely. But again, you saw the athletic potential. You see some of the traits, long, lean, athletic guy on the edge. But I think these 3 have a really complete set of skills or set of skill sets that they can kind of bring to the table. I think they all do a little bit of different things. And I think, again, this combination, I think this is why they didn't hammer the transfer portal at the edge room like they did the defensive tackle room. I think they wanted to be better. They wanted to have higher end talent in the defensive tackle room. They didn't even really look at guys on the edge. And I think that has a lot to do with these 3 playing some really solid reps for them as true freshmen.
I was thinking the same thing. You look at Dan Lanning and his approach to the transfer portal. He was not scared to go out and make this team better at pretty much every single position in the transfer portal. That one group that I don't even think they pursued a single edge rusher was because I think they have a lot of belief in Matayo Uiagalelei, Teitum Tuioti, and Blake Purchase to take that step. And quite frankly, we can't blame them because you look at what you saw from them as true freshmen at the Power 5 level, extremely rare. You saw some really good things from all 3. Now let's start with Teitum Tuioti, who was, I'll just put my hand up and say we were sleeping on him throughout 2023. Now, I think we've made up for it in this offseason, talking about him a lot. You talk about probably the best young edge rusher out of the 3. I thought it was Teitum Tuioti. Now, what stands out to me the most about Teitum is, one, you got some really unique physical traits where, all right, he's 6'3". Maybe you don't think he has that much length. He's got a 79-inch wingspan, and the kid knows how to use that length. You take a look at this pass rush against Colorado here. Again, Teitum Tuioti blends having some really, really impressive traits with you can tell his pops is a coach because this is a polished edge rusher that knows how to use that length. You take a look at this right here, working against this right tackle against Colorado. Teitum using that length, getting his hands early on this right tackle, really just doing what he wants. When you have these long arms, you can use that to really get your hands on early and kind of really control offensive tackles. That's exactly what Teitum does. Opens them up on the inside. And then another thing we talk about a lot, you got to make plays when you're in the backfield, right? We are seeing a lot of dynamic, athletic quarterbacks that can escape a lot of pressure. Teitum Tuioti, very, very athletic, making it happen, pursuing Shadur Sanders. Teitum Tuioti, big time juice coming off the edge.
I think what stood out to him versus Matayo Uiagalelei and Blake Purchase was just very consistently having a plan of attack as a pass rusher and being able to react and work off what the offensive tackles are giving him. And again, those things you kind of mentioned, son of a coach, like just having a really, really good instinct. But I also do think, again, what you kind of mentioned, like maybe he doesn't have some of the we'll just straight look at him and say, oh, this is a tradesy guy. But again, when you talk like, okay, if you're only 6'3", that's not a super tall, long pass rusher. But when you talk about the arm length, it's like, well, it's the Aaron Donald argument. He doesn't look like he's a tradesy guy. And then you realize he's got like the longest arms in the league. It's, again, I think his upside's a little bit higher than even like we were giving him credit for. Because again, maybe he doesn't look as physically impressive, maybe not as explosive as Blake Purchase, maybe doesn't look as long and big and physical as Matayo Uiagalelei, but he does have the tool set to do it. And again, his refinement in his game is at a much higher level, I feel like.
And you start talking about next steps for Teitum, I think it's just becoming a grown man, right? I mean, you look at Matayo Uiagalelei. We knew Matayo Uiagalelei was going to come in year one and be a guy since this kid was a sophomore in high school at St. John Bosco. You look at Teitum and say there's a lot of physical development with this cat that can take place. And you get Teitum in a full offseason in the weight room with this Oregon program. That was the step that you want to see him take, right? He knows how to use the length. He has the length. Now can he develop kind of that grown man strength along the line of scrimmage? That's the next step for Teitum Tuioti. If he puts that together in 2024, dangerous pass rusher coming off the edge. Next guy we got to talk about, Blake Purchase, who did a little bit more of a different style of edge rusher than Teitum Tuioti. Holy, that name gives me some trouble. And Matayo Uiagalelei, you look at Blake Purchase, this kid's a Ferrari, right? You look at Matayo Uiagalelei, this is a Mack truck. He's going to use heavy hands. He's going to just put tackles right into the lap of quarterbacks. Blake Purchase has a different level of flexibility and juice off the line of scrimmage. True freshman on true freshman right here, though. Blake Purchase, Spencer Fanu, one really good get off working against this left tackle right here. What I want to highlight is the bend. I mean, you're talking about a big body that can get low, has that ankle and knee flexibility to bend and run that arch around offensive tackles. At the end of the day, there's just not many offensive tackles that are going to be able to deal with what Blake Purchase is bringing to the table. I think this is probably, at least in my opinion, the highest upside edge rusher because of what he can do from an athletic standpoint with that get off the line of scrimmage and how he can bend and be flexible around offensive tackles.
Especially when you're talking purely as that guy who can be a great, great pass rusher. Again, like
yes.
Will he be as well-rounded as Matayo Uiagalelei or even Teitum Tuioti? Again, probably needs to show a little bit more of that, be more consistent and physical in the run. But what you've seen from Blake Purchase, that athleticism, that's what you need to be a big-time sack getter. And again, that's kind of the one thing with Oregon. It's like, well, who's going to be that guy? Who's going to put that 5, 6, 7, 8 plus kind of sack numbers up? When you have that ability on the edge to just win that quickly and that effectively, that's how you get a lot of sacks.
And I think you're right. You look at Blake Purchase was probably the most inconsistent of the edge rushers as a true freshman, but probably had the most impressive flashes of these true freshmen. Another really, really good rep, though. This is an NFL tackle in Troy Fautanu. Quite frankly, probably the most athletic tackle that we saw in all of the country last year. Working against this left tackle, Troy Fautanu here. Again, Blake Purchase just has that different level in terms of attacking the outside shoulder. How rarely do we see Troy Fautanu give up his outside shoulder against edge rushers? Almost never. Blake Purchase makes it happen as a true freshman. I mean, those are the type of things that if you're Oregon, you're seeing on the film and say, how can we get that a little bit more consistent going into 2024? Last cat we got to talk about, Matayo Uiagalelei, who probably gets the most attention out of these three edge rushers, and for good reason. I mean, he has a different level of power that you see. And when you have the ability to just go right through offensive tackles, it makes you such a hard edge rusher to pick up in pass protection.
And you can be disruptive more consistently. I mean, you don't need to win easily or quickly every single time. It's like with Matayo Uiagalelei, you see him pretty much I think he's got the ability to be really disruptive, play in and play out, kind of like what the Missouri defensive ends were. I mean, they're not like the premier Ferrari kind of explosive guys, But when you watch that Missouri defensive end room, big, physical, always disrupting quarterbacks, being right in their lap, pushing pockets, I think that's Matayo U's role. Because again, probably doesn't have the explosiveness that you kind of look for from Blake Purchase. Doesn't maybe have some of the smoothness and in the refinement in his game quite yet that you see with Teitum Tuioti. But again, he does have what you kind of said he has, and that's a unique level of power in the ability to use some of that length and combine it with the power and be a real problem.
So you said the Missouri edge rushers. I kind of thought Jared Verse from Florida State. Like how we talked about Jared Verse in terms of just having devastating power in the hands. That's kind of what I think with Matayo U. And I think this first rep right here, left tackle against Oregon State, an Oregon State offensive line that was damn good in 2024. This is kind of what fires you up about Matayo U, is just low pads, speed to power. I'm not going to do anything fancy. I'm just going to get right into your chest plate and walk you right into the lap of the quarterback. That's what Matayo U getting it done against his older brother here, DJ. He doesn't even really get hands on DJ. He just uses he said, I'm not going to sack my brother because I don't feel good about it. I'm going to make the left tackle sack my brother for me. That's the type of power that you're talking about with Matayo U. This is the stuff that you can't really teach. You just have. Matayo U has it. Now, what excites me about Matayo U, Dill, is that you saw some flashes of some refinement. I didn't think you saw it very consistently. And again, it's because we're talking about a true freshman working against the right tackle against Utah right here, top of your screen. This is the stuff you want to see from Matayo U to take that next step, where we have that one really good get off the line of scrimmage right there. But number two, when you have the ability to just have that power to go right through tackles, make them heavy set. If you start using your hands around offensive tackles like this is the next step for Matayo U. Obviously got to make that play in the backfield. We talked about that. That being said, again, you see how I can set you up with the power, but I'm going to use my hands to get off this block, run that arch, be a little bit of flexible. There's some sneaky flexibility right here from Matayo U. Run the arch and go get the quarterback. If you see that on a more consistent basis from Matayo U in 2024, dangerous edge rusher in the Big Ten.
And I think that's kind of the next step, frankly, for him and Purchase. Just having what Teitum Tuioti had with that plan that I was kind of saying, when it looks like he always is moving, he's reacting quickly to what the offensive tackles are giving him. I think those two, again, because of their athletic traits, if they kind of bring that into their game, those are two guys who I think can be super disruptive. And again, get them to that top end level where they were a good unit last year. It's not like they stunk or anything, but you're looking for, when you're trying to win national championships, which Dan Lanning's put this Oregon team in position to do, the margins get really small, and you can't afford to have too many plays where you're almost like lost a little bit, where you didn't have a plan, you get stuck, you get caught, and you're not really impacting the game. I think those three, or those two especially, but those three as a unit need to be disrupting plays almost every
100%. I think you make a good point. We are nitpicking this Oregon team because it's really hard to find holes. And one of the holes we saw last year was an elite pass rush. Again, they sacked the quarterback 6.7% of the time. That was 54th in the country. It wasn't bad, but Dan Lanning knows the recipe of winning national championships. We've just seen it with Michigan and Georgia the last couple of years. It is having an elite pass rush. Dan Lanning knows that. And again, he didn't go to the transfer portal to add any edge rushers because he knows he has the talent to do so. You just got to see that development. The last thing I want to note on this Oregon defensive line is the depth. You look at bringing in Derek Carman, who elite pass rusher from the inside. And again, not a knock on guys like Casey Rogers or Popo. They weren't game wreckers. Derek Carman's a game wrecker on the inside. But then just the mere fact of pushing Amari Washington into the two deep, you talk about another recipe for Oregon and Georgia was not just the top end talent on the defensive line, but the depth. You talk about winning games in December and January. You got to be deep along the line of scrimmage. You got to be able to rotate your big bodies. You're bringing Derek Carman. Not only do you get better on the defensive line, but now Amari Washington, a guy that, again, going into year two, going to take a step, is now in year two deep. This is a guy that can start on a lot of Power 5 programs across the country. Not only is the top-end talent there for Oregon on the defensive line, they are deep in the Big Ten as well. Aiden Breland as a true freshman, not really sure what he's going to look like. We loved him out of Mater Dei coming out in the 2024 class. A lot to be fired up for this Oregon defensive line. Again, Dill, next week, wide receivers, the fellas are fired up to dive into the wide receivers. That might be like a 25-minute one because there's going to be a lot of film to look at. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.